Hello everyone. Welcome to Recap Queen. In this video, we will explain The Maze Runner. This movie tells the story of a group of teenagers who are trapped in an endless maze. Can they get out of the labyrinth and be free from the terrible maze guard monsters? Let's find out in The Maze Runner. The Maze Runner begins by showing a young man who is in a freight elevator. He had just woken up from his stupor when the elevator continued to move from the ground up. He looked panicked and scared, especially when he heard a scary roar that came from nowhere. After arriving at the top of the elevator, there were many people gathered, as if they had been waiting for his arrival. When the bars opened, one of them called him Greenie, or the new boy. Panicked and not knowing what was going on there, the new boy immediately ran fast, until he finally fell. Everyone laughs at him. He then realized that the place was surrounded by a very high stone wall. Because he tried to escape, even though he failed, he was then sentenced to imprisonment for some time. Not long after, a young man named Albie approached him and asked his name and origins. Surprisingly, he didn't remember anything about himself and was confused. Albie said that it was normal because they all had memory loss when they first came. He then informed that his memory would recover in the next few days like the others. Albie then freed the new boy and took him around the place. He says that they call the place the Glade and the inhabitants are called the Gladers. Albie, who is the leader of the Gladers, then explains what activities they do every day. He also tells about the freight elevator that carries the new kid and calls it the box. The elevator brought supplies of fresh groceries once a month and carried one new boy like himself. After that, he introduced him to a young man named Newt, who was second in command after him. After a brief introduction, he then explained about 3 important rules in the Glade that all Gladers must obey. First, do each task. Second, don't hurt the other Glade residents. Third, lastly and most importantly, don't run into the walls that surround the place. After receiving all the directions from the leader of the Gladers, the new boy meets a teenage boy named Chuck who helps him make his bed during his stay in the Glade. However, the new kid seemed very curious about what was behind the wall, because instead he headed towards the open wall gate, ignoring Chuck who was making his bed. Chuck tries to chase after the new kid to keep him from getting in there. Soon 2 other young men came running through the gate from behind the wall. Chuck told the new kid that the 2 of them were runners. Runners are people who can enter the labyrinth behind the wall. Chuck apparently slipped up because they agreed to keep the labyrinth secret from the new kid. Because he was so curious, the new boy tried to pass through the gate, but his efforts were immediately blocked by another Glader named Gally who pushed him hard until he fell. A small commotion in front of the gate then sparked the curiosity of the other Gladers, who then approached Gally and the new boy. When they were all in front of the gate, there was a loud roar from inside the labyrinth and soon the gate closed. In the evening, they held a welcoming party for the new boy. Newt then told the new kid about the maze. Newt said that only runners were allowed to enter the maze while pointing at a young boy he saw this afternoon. That young boy was Minho, who was the leader of the runners team, and his running partner this afternoon was Ben. The runners are tasked with going through the maze, remembering the pattern and then mapping the maze pattern to find a way out of the Glade. They've been doing this for 3 years and haven't found a clue because the pattern in the labyrinth changes every night, so they're having a hard time mapping it out. Newt then told about the vicious monsters in the labyrinth they called Grievers. The monster only appears in the labyrinth when the gate is closed. That's why the runners have to race against time so they don't get stuck in the maze when the gates are closed. The party continues and now Gally challenges the new kid to a one-on-one fight with his bare hands. However, before the new kid could fight back, Gally had already knocked him down. When his head hit the hard ground, he suddenly remembered his name, namely Thomas. He got up and said that his name was Thomas. The Gladers cheered and cheered Thomas' name. After that, they decided to end the party and went to bed. But Thomas didn't fall asleep. After the fight with Gally, he doesn't just remember his name. He remembered that he was in a research lab before being brought to the Glade. Dimly, he also heard a sentence, "Wicked is good." But he didn't know what or who Wicked was and whether it had anything to do with the inhabitants of the Glade and the labyrinth. The next day, while looking for fertilizer in the forest, Ben suddenly attacked him saying, "All this is your fault." Thomas then tried to fight and save himself. Albie and the others managed to help Thomas and incapacitate Ben. After checking Ben's condition, it turns out that he has been stung by a Griever so that his behavior becomes more aggressive and often delirious. Eventually, Ben is forced into the labyrinth just before the gates close, as his condition is incurable and will endanger the rest of the Glade's inhabitants if left alive. That night, Thomas had another dream about himself in a research lab, but this time, he saw a girl with him and several people were the subject of an experiment just like him and the girl, and one of them was Albie. Again, Thomas heard someone say "Wicked is good" over and over again. When he woke up at dawn, Thomas saw Minho and Albie entering the maze. Newt said that Minho and Albie intended to find traces of Ben in the labyrinth to confirm his condition. Even though he wasn't a runner, Albie was the first to arrive at the Glade, so he understood the situation in the labyrinth better than anyone else. But until the evening, Minho and Albie did not return and they all became worried. Only a few minutes left before the gate was completely closed. They saw Minho, who looked troubled because he was supporting the injured Albie and didn't seem to be able to reach the gate in time. Seeing this, Thomas was desperate to barge in through the stone gate, which was slowly closing. Thomas finally made it through the stone gate and now he is trapped in the maze with the unconscious Minho and Albie. It turns out that Albie has been stung by a Griever, just like Ben. Minho had intended to leave Albie and save himself, but Thomas insisted on protecting Albie first, before they tried to save themselves. Thomas and Minho finally decided to tie Albie's body to the vines that filled one of the labyrinth walls and disguised his body so as not to be eaten by Grievers. One of the Grievers suddenly came closer, and before the creature could attack them, Minho immediately left from there, leaving Thomas, who still had to hide Albie's body behind the vines. Thomas couldn't help but hide behind the vines until the Griever left. When he felt that the situation was safe, he came out of hiding, but after only walking a few steps, the creature returned and chased him. Thomas then ran helter-skelter, following wherever his feet stepped. The important thing was to be able to escape from the pursuit of the Griever. After nearly falling into an endless abyss and trapping a Griever in the vines, he finally reunited with Minho and fled together. Thomas then stopped and realized that the labyrinth was starting to change patterns. An idea crossed his mind. He intended to trap the Griever between the pattern-changing walls of the labyrinth. Minho tried to stop him, but he had already rushed through the walls of the labyrinth and provoked a Griever to follow him. Thomas managed to break through the labyrinth walls, whose position changed as the pattern changed in the maze, while the Griever was squeezed by the walls until it finally died. The following day, Newt and the others were desperate because their friends who had entered the labyrinth had not yet returned. But then, Thomas and Minho were seen from a distance, and they also managed to bring Albie, who was still alive despite being injured. Minho then told everyone that Thomas not only saw a Griever on his first night entering the labyrinth, but he also managed to kill one of the Grievers, which no one had ever done before. When all the Glade residents held a meeting to determine the punishment for Thomas for violating the third rule, suddenly a sound was heard indicating that there was a shipment via the freight elevator. Everyone flocked to the box, and when they got there, how shocked they were because there was a girl who had fainted in the elevator. All this time everyone said there had been teenage boys, and this was the first time they had sent a girl. Newt finds a slip of paper that says that the girl was the last to be sent to the Glade, indicating that the supplies of groceries that were delivered were also the last. The girl was delirious and called out Thomas's name, before finally fainted again. Everyone then looked at Thomas with a questioning look, but he did not know the girl at all. Thomas then told Minho that he wanted to examine the corpse of the Griever trapped between the walls of the labyrinth for clues so they could all get out of the Glade. Minho agreed to help Thomas and gathered some other runners to enter the maze and look for clues. After dissecting the Griever's body, Thomas and Minho found some kind of mechanical device that lit up and revealed the number 7. It turns out that Griever is a monster robot that was deliberately created to kill people who enter the labyrinth. After successfully finding the device, Minho then took Thomas to a hut in the middle of the forest. Inside the hut, there is a miniature labyrinth that he made from 3 years of mapping and exploring the maze. Minho had explored all sides of the maze and memorized the cycle of changing patterns, but he couldn't find a way out of the maze at all. Albie also asked Minho to keep this a secret from everyone so that they still have hope of getting out of the Glade. However, after finding a mechanical device on the Griever, Minho again believed that there was another way out of the labyrinth, because the runners once found a maze wall that contained numbers 1 to 8 on its surface. Every night, the maze changes patterns and the walls that open are different. However, the sequence of numbers has always been the same over the years, so Minho can determine which number wall will open. Not long after, the Glade residents informed Minho and Thomas that the girl had regained consciousness and caused a small commotion. Because the girl seemed to know Thomas, he finally tried to calm her down and talk to her. The girl apparently remembered her name, namely Teresa, but she didn't remember anything else besides wicked is good. After that, Teresa told him that she found 2 serums in her pocket and gave them to Thomas. After observing it for a while, Thomas decided to inject the serum into Albie, hoping to cure him. The next day, Thomas and Minho decided to venture back into the maze while carrying the mechanical device they found on the Griever's carcass, hoping to find another way out of the maze. After being in the labyrinth wall area that was inscribed with the number 7, the mechanical device suddenly sounded and signaled the 2 of them to go somewhere. Thomas and Minho arrived at a location called Glade. When they found a dead end and checked the situation there, the light on the mechanical device turned green and a hidden gate automatically opened. They then passed through the gate and entered a location they believed to be the access for Grievers in and out of the labyrinth. When in front of a hole, there is a laser beam that scans the bodies of the 2 of them. The laser activates a trap, causing the gate to slowly close, and the maze pattern begins to change. The 2 immediately fled from there, and after struggling to avoid the crush of the changing maze walls, Minho and Thomas finally managed to get out of the labyrinth. Minho thought that the Grievers' access to enter and exit the labyrinth could be used as a way out for them. He seemed happy that he had finally found a way out after exploring the labyrinth for 3 years. But not all Glade residents agree with Minho and Thomas because it means they have to face off against the Grievers with their own lives at stake. In the debate, Teresa came to tell that Albie was awake and wanted to say something very important to everyone. Albie reveals that his memory has fully recovered. He remembered well Thomas, the golden child of the group of people who sent them all to the Glade. At night, the labyrinth gate didn't close as it should. Not only that, all the gates on the other side of the wall were also fully open. Soon, the Grievers attacked the Glade from all directions, forcing everyone to save themselves. Some of the Glade residents tried to fight back and some chose to stay hidden. Mass slaughter was inevitable. Albie was one of them who died in the massacre after he sacrificed himself to save Chuck. Before being killed, Albie orders Thomas to get everyone out of the labyrinth safely. Thomas, who feels guilty for Albie and has had frequent flashes of memory cut off since he arrived at the Glade, decides to stab himself with a piece of Griever's claw and hopes to remember everything again. Teresa and the others then inject the last anti-venom into Thomas's body so that he can recover quickly. Slowly but surely, a series of flashes of memories in Thomas's mind began to form into a single unified memory. He had remembered everything. The next day, Thomas woke up and his condition was fully recovered. He then reveals to Newt, Minho, Chuck and Teresa that the labyrinth and Grievers were created by an organization called Wicked. Thomas said that the Glade was not a prison, but a test site, and they were all test subjects for an experiment he didn't know about. Thomas also admitted that he and Teresa worked at Wicked and observed all the Gladers before making one of the Gladers. As the afternoon approached, Gally, who did not like Thomas, gathered the Gladers want to sacrifice Thomas and Teresa to the Grievers because they were the cause of all the chaos that occurred in the Glade. He is sure Thomas tried to take over the Glade's leadership after Albie died. However, Gally's rebellion was met with resistance from Newt, Minho, Chuck, and the Gladers who sided with Thomas. Thomas and Teresa managed to free themselves with the help of Newt and his friends. After that, they invited other Gladers who wanted to join them in finding a way out of the maze. A few people joined Thomas's group, while Gally and his cohorts decided to stay in the Glade. Before it got dark, Thomas and the others immediately entered the labyrinth and tried to find a way out through the clues they had obtained from the Griever's mechanical device. When they got there, a Griever was already at the end, as if waiting for them to arrive. They then made plans. Newt and the others distract the Grievers, while Thomas and Teresa try to open the gate. Several people died in an attempt to withstand the Grievers' fierce attacks. As Thomas and the others began to struggle to contain the growing flock of Grievers, Teresa couldn't open the final gate because she needed an 8-digit code. Thomas and Minho then assumed that the code was the parts in the maze whose patterns changed according to the sequence of numbers. Teresa immediately entered the numbers and the gate was successfully opened and they were faced with a passage. They then walked down the hall to the Wicked laboratory where everyone had died. They enter the laboratory control center and there Thomas turns on the computer which shows a video recording of a woman named Ava Page. Dr. Ava Page is the director of Wicked who is responsible for conducting experiments on Thomas and his friends. The lady said that if Thomas and the others watched this video, it meant they all passed the test. Ava then reveals that the world has been destroyed by a very powerful solar storm, followed by a deadly virus pandemic called the Flare. Flare is a deadly virus that attacks the brain and turns people affected by the virus into zombies. Wicked is trying to develop a drug that can cure the Flare virus and they are all experimental subjects for the development of the drug. However, Wicked's efforts to contain the pandemic have not yielded results because suddenly armed forces are seen breaking into the research center, and Ava Page is seen shooting herself. After the video footage ended, a door suddenly opened. When Thomas was about to enter there, Gally suddenly entered the room, carrying a firearm. Gally, who has been stung by the Griever's poison, thinks they should all stay in the labyrinth and blames Thomas for taking everyone away. When Gally was about to aim a bullet at Thomas, immediately Minho stabbed him with a spear to death. But Gally had already fired his gun which hit Chuck who was trying to protect Thomas. Chuck eventually dies from the gunshot wound. While Thomas and the others are still mourning Chuck's death, armed forces wearing masks barge into the facility and drag them into a helicopter that takes them airborne over the vast desert and close to a ruined city. The film ends by showing Dr. Ava Page who is still alive and well and healthy. Page then points out that the first experiment was a success, and the survivors are now entering phase 2.